Just to clarify, right from the off, note the lack of a definite article in this video's title. This is emphatically not a video about how Japanese organised crime taught me lessons about running Dungeons and Dragons. I'm sure that video exists somewhere on YouTube, but this is not it. Rather, this is a video about the Yakuza games, a weird and wonderful series of games whose popularity in the West has hovered somewhere between cult classic and breakout hit status for the last decade or so. The games boast some really spectacular storytelling and surprisingly engaging character work, within a fun and dynamic world with a ton of time-sink minigames to make you obsess over trophies and achievements. And like just about everything I take an interest in, I've been relentlessly mining it for inspiration and ideas for running TTRPGs. So, here I present the fruits of my labour thus far. Before we go any further, I should say, I am aware that the series is sticking with the name Like a Dragon, in line with its Japanese name, in the future. But for ease of reference, I'm just going to call it Yakuza throughout this video, especially as that name applies to most of the games that I've played. And on that note, it's worth noting at the beginning that Yakuza is a big series, and my exposure to it is not total. Specifically, I've played Yakuza 0, Yakuza Kiwami 1 and 2, and the first few chapters of Like a Dragon. So those are the games I'll be specifically referencing, in both commentary and footage. I feel like I've got a decent grounding in the series from those games, but who knows? Maybe this video will get a sequel when I've played the rest of the series. I think for me, the thing that defines the Yakuza series best is its extraordinary balance of tones. It's well known for all of those surprisingly involved minigames that I mentioned earlier, but also for the fact that these exist against the backdrop of a series based loosely on real-life organised crime syndicates. It's not unique in this, of course. GTA also balances its gritty urban crime stories with a vein of wacky humour, but Yakuza's contrast is particularly striking. On the one hand, you have a serious, often quite intense main story, all about honour and loyalty and what it means to be a man, complete with thematically significant back tattoos and an awful lot of really quite intense homoeroticism. On the other hand, you're likely to spend quite a bit of time in between these story events playing with toy cars, or helping a man track down his pet crayfish, or running a hostess club for nebulous reasons. Now, I don't know about you, but quite a lot of the D&D I've ever played has gone to some really silly places. A player character shapeshifted into a dinosaur, waking someone up by peeing on them. Another PC rampaging through an embassy looking for the ambassador to do them a favour. Demons being named after senior Tory politicians, that kind of thing. It's inevitable that when you get together with your friends to, let's face it, play make-believe, you're going to get lots of silly and absurd things happening. It's all part of the fun. But especially as a DM, you may also want to have some serious and deep story time, and not have all those NPCs you spent hours working on given funny nicknames and undermined by your players. How you achieve this is all about your group dynamic, and communication, as always, is key, starting with agreeing what kind of game you're playing with your players. But one thing that might help with that is agreeing where the wild silliness and invention that players often love can take place, and where you'd prefer that they take things a bit more seriously. You may want your main villain to be off limits for mockery, aside from the vicious kind that bards cast, or you may feel that allowing your players the odd one-liner or bit of joking around is key to helping them feel powerful, or making sure the game doesn't become too dark. You know your table best. Here's the thing though, it would be one thing if Yakuza maintained a strict separation, in that kind of negotiated way, between serious main story and goofy side stories and minigames, but this is not really the case. The balance between silly and po-faced pervades the whole of the games. It's there, pretty obviously, in the gloriously heightened combat, where stamping on someone's face can do more damage than shooting them with a literal gun, though neither of these things is actually lethal. To say nothing of Like a Dragon's more traditional JRPG-inspired special attacks. Even some of the more out-there sub-stories like to end with the protagonist reflecting on the valuable lessons they've learned about not running out of toilet paper in public or whatever. For that matter, even the fact that at least once per game, Kiryu will punch his way through dozens of hapless goons at once complements all that gritty stuff about honour and cutting off your little finger to demonstrate it. And the thing is, this kind of constant balance, if not tension, feels very organic to me. TTRPG players don't generally make a strict separation between the serious bits and the silly bits, and while I think that kind of separation probably can be worked out, as I suggested a minute ago, there's always the risk that, unless managed carefully, what you really enforce is a separation between the serious bits and the fun bits. That's not to suggest that dramatic story beats can't be fun, but if you try to dictate your player's response to them, that might well be what ends up happening. Tone is a tricky thing to manage, because as a DM, you will never have total control over it, and that's just something you have to accept. You can absolutely tell your players the kind of tone you're going for. This can be pretty key for a horror game, for instance. But it's up to them to buy in. Again, it's all about communication, as always, and making sure your expectations are matched up with those of your players. But to be honest, a little flexibility also goes a long way, and even a degree of acceptance that you can't always control what will happen, or how your players will take things. You're there to have fun, after all. Depending on your age and life stage, this may be your player's one free evening away from work or childcare or any number of other responsibilities. So let them have fun in the ways that they want to, as long as that's not detracting from the other players' fun, including the DM's. For myself, I don't think I'd find a game with no dramatic stakes particularly satisfying. But when I sit down to play D&D or really any other RPG, I'm there to have a laugh with my friends, regardless of the subject matter, and so I expect some kind of emergent nonsense. I think that's probably why I feel so at home with the Yakuza games, in fact. It's exactly the kind of tone that I enjoy, and even aspire towards. There are, you could feasibly argue, two main characters in the Yakuza series, at least up to Like a Dragon: Kazuma Kiryu and the fictional Tokyo ward of Kamurocho. Though it's not the main setting of every game, Kamurocho is the most major setting of the series. There are other recurring settings like Sotenbori and Isezaki Ijincho, but Kamurocho is so core to the series that it's the main thing linking some of the spin-off games to the main series. Now, I've talked about settings quite a bit on this channel already, and I've no desire to repeat myself. But what Yakuza offers that is particularly unique is a city setting that we get to see changing over time. The most obvious difference is between the boom economy prime of late 80s Kamurocho, as seen in Yakuza 0, and the area as it appears 2 decades later in the rest of the series, having gone through various stages of redevelopment and acquired a massive skyscraper right in the middle. Even between Kiwami 1 and 2, set a year apart, the layout has changed slightly. Some businesses have appeared, while others have closed down, and some new areas are accessible from the street. This tells us that Kamurocho is a lively place of constant change, full of valuable property. Then again, sometimes the lack of change is the point. The fact that, in later games, the soap house Shangri-La is still ruined from that time some lunatic drove a dump truck into it, makes a point about how some parts of the area are valued over others. A little like I talked about with the Trails series, this gives us an indication of how economic factors affect people's lives in a very physical way. The very topography of the setting is almost literally shaped by economics. There are all kinds of ways to make this kind of thing apparent in a TTRPG. There's descriptions of the player's surroundings, what materials houses are made out of, for instance, or how big they are, or whether or not they're set apart from each other, or the layout of a city setting. what kinds of neighbourhoods or businesses might spring up along the main road or river, for instance. And as with Kamurocho, the pace of change might be an indication of economic activity. A more deprived area may not change at all for decades, while a busy marketplace or trades ward might be different every time the players visit. Geography is one of the many tools in your arsenal as a storyteller, and when deployed effectively, it can be a very useful one, giving all kinds of implicit details for your players to pick up on, and making the world that bit richer. Going back to Yakuza specifically, it's worth touching here on the sub-stories, all of the people wandering around with eccentric problems that will probably be solved by hitting some other people at some point. These provide fun flavour for the game and help with that balance of tones that I talked about, but also help to make the settings feel alive. At best, their emergence feels completely natural. You're just walking down the street and you see a queue of people waiting for something and decide to investigate. Or you get flagged down by someone looking for help. It feels, as it should, like the city is full of people living their own lives, like I talked about in the Persona and Trails videos, and you just happen to be interacting with some of them. All around Kiryu are people just getting on with their lives, some of whom occasionally need a large man to punch someone for them. It's an easy thing to throw into an RPG session, just a small side quest involving an NPC that can take up half a session, while the PCs are on their way to somewhere else. Maybe that NPC recurs as an ally later, maybe the characters never see them again. Either way can work, and in fact Yakuza does both. If you dot this kind of thing throughout a campaign, you end up giving the sense of a living, breathing world, and that does wonders for immersion. As already mentioned, I don't actually know very much about organised crime, which I know may surprise you, coming from someone who makes YouTube videos about games. That said, I have seen a lot of films and TV series based around the subject, which I assume are completely accurate to real life. And one thing I've learned is that criminals absolutely love a strict hierarchy. They just can't get enough of it, and the more layers, the better. The Yakuza series dives into this headfirst, with numerous rival gangs made up of semi-independent families, which themselves have different standings relative to each other, to say nothing of the specific position of a given member within their family. It is, in the words of the immortal bard, enough to drive you crazy if you let it. Major characters are frequently introduced with a freeze frame telling you who they are and who they work for, which is particularly entertaining when they've just introduced themselves.
5代目近江連合会長の郷田仁と申します。
Yeah, you don't say. Characters are also sorted in the pause menu's glossary by their respective affiliations and or relationship to the protagonists, which is handy because you get a lot of names thrown at you in these games, so it's nice to be able to remember who's who in relation to whom. Now, based on that, you may already be able to see both the benefit of this and the potential pitfalls, both in Yakuza and for wider use. The benefit is that a complex organisation is fantastic storytelling fuel. You get scheming underlings, conflicts between people with different levels of authority, officers whose different personalities result in very distinct management styles, all that sort of thing. The plots of both Yakuza 0 and Kiwami are both based largely around internal conflict within a single Yakuza clan, with all kinds of layers of scheming and betrayal going on. Now, I've talked about giving factions distinctive identities in the past, so the players understand what they're about, what their goals are, and so forth, and you can carry that through in terms of how they're organised. How strict is their hierarchy, if they even have one? How do members of different status interact? How much authority does the leader hold, if there is a single leader? How much independence to act do lieutenants or officers have? All of these kinds of things will give the organisation or faction a little more flavour, whether they're a mercenary force, a church, a criminal group, or even a government, and are a good way of showing how their guiding philosophy or ideas express themselves in practical forms, or maybe how their ideals are contradicted by reality. All of this is very exciting and full of possibility, but let's get back to that pesky downside I mentioned. To put it simply, complexity is great, but you need to be able to communicate it to players, and it needs to stick. In general, when playing a TTRPG, you can't really give your players a Yakuza-style glossary of who's who. It's not impossible, especially if you're playing on an online platform like Roll20, but what you really want to avoid is your players having to check it in the middle of a session, or even the middle of an encounter. Partly because that suggests they're having difficulty following what's going on, but also because that's either going to slow things down while they check, or they're going to potentially miss some of what's going on while their attention is elsewhere. There are ways to mitigate this with regard to organizations and hierarchies. You can try to make titles fairly intuitive, for instance, with prefixes like over and under, so the players will get that the deputy sub-librarian they're talking to probably isn't very high in the ranks.
What really matters is my title. I think I'll make myself Vice President. No, wait. Junior Vice President.
Another way to ensure clarity is to use existing titles like military ranks, which players will probably more or less get, although it's best to be broad. Keep it to things like private, lieutenant, captain, in case your players aren't sure if a major outranks a colonel or something like that. As is often the case with this kind of world building, a light touch works wonders. And you should always try to approach things from the point of view of someone who doesn't have access to your pages and pages of world building notes. Because that's exactly the position your players are in. And if they don't understand what's going on, everything is going to fall flat. Alright, let's talk about Majima, shall we? I know you've been waiting for that, and I can't really blame you. Now, Majima is a playable protagonist in Yakuza 0 and, to a lesser extent, Kiwami 2, but I particularly want to think about his role in Kiwami 1, where he's a pretty textbook example of a rival character. This is apparent on a story level, as it is in various games in the series, in Majima's weird fascination with Kiryu. It's a really complex and interesting dynamic that stands up to an awful lot of unpacking. Is it rooted in respect? Or maybe envy? Is there genuine affection there? Is it homoerotic? Well, yes, it is. There's no real question there. In fact, its biggest problem to my mind is that it's a bit too powerful. It threatens to overwhelm the actual main story of Kiwami 1. And Majima's handful of appearances in the main story feels strangely divorced from all the encounters Kiryu's been having with him on the streets. I mention all of this because I'm a big fan of rival characters in RPGs. They can provide a unique and compelling challenge for your PCs, not only by matching them in combat, but also ideologically, as in the way Majima's idiosyncratic and variable code of honor both complements and butts up against Kiryu's apparently more fixed code. They can be a twisted mirror to your PC, a version of them that went wrong, or right, somewhere along the way. A childhood friend, maybe. Oh, hey, Kiryu's got one of those as well. What are the odds? And of course, rivals needn't always be antagonists. In fact, forming a temporary alliance with your rival to combat some greater threat can be one of the most rewarding ways to interact with them. What's more, the Majima Everywhere system also gives us an indication of how a rival can work mechanically. Majima's stated reason for hiding in manholes or whatever is that he wants to test and challenge Kiryu to help him regain his former strength. And to reinforce this, the game has a whole ability tree tied to these specific fights. This is something you could absolutely emulate in a TTRPG. In D&D, for instance, you might reward a PC with a boon or even a feat for successfully defeating their rival. But even beyond that, it's a useful mindset to be in if you want to introduce a rival character. They might not think of themselves as being there to test the PCs, but that's exactly the purpose you can put them to. Maybe as a test for a particular kind of tactics or teamwork. depending on the kind of game you run. This is where having them be mirror images of the PCs can work again. Maybe the PCs can end up learning specific techniques or tactics from them, if they're the same class or subclass, for instance. Though that's really just one possible approach among many. They also just make for useful story obstacles if you want to delay the big showdown with the ultimate villain. Maybe they work for that villain, or maybe they just turn up out of nowhere to challenge the players as an annoyance. They might be fun and compelling presences in their own right, or they might be petty little weasels that your players will love to hate. Either way, they should pose a real challenge on multiple levels, and that challenge should be productive and should spur the players and their characters on greater heights. Of all the series I've covered on this channel to date, Yakuza is definitely the closest in setting and genre to the real contemporary world, and hence the furthest from the sort of sci-fi or fantasy setting of most TTRPGs. But the fundamentals of strong storytelling still apply. It's a long-running series with compelling characters and a dramatic plot, and there's always a great deal to be learned from those for any GM or writer, regardless of generic trappings. But of course, Yakuza is also an RPG series, complete with numerical stats, character upgrades, even random encounters. And especially given Like a Dragon's tongue-in-cheek borrowings from classic JRPG series like Dragon Quest, is it any wonder that the series should come full circle to be used as inspiration for TTRPGs? Thanks for watching. As with the last couple of series I've covered in these videos, I know that Yakuza has a very devoted fan base, so if you know anyone you think would be interested in this video, by all means share it with them. As I mentioned earlier, it's entirely possible I might return to the series in another video at some point, after playing some more of it. So if that's something you'd like to see, please do give this video a like, and drop a comment down below. And don't forget to subscribe for more like this one way or another. I'm also trying to get back to streaming on Twitch at the moment, including those Yakuza games I haven't played yet, so please do give that a look. The link is in the down below, and you'll find it elsewhere on my channel as well. Until next time, goodbye friends.